conversation series that addresses issues that are timely and important to the local community and of interest to students and other members of the university community as well. And our idea is that the series, that these conversations will help to break the bubble. They can sometimes envelop our campus and indeed our community that can separate us from one another, and especially during the pandemic. Have you felt that bubble sort of surrounding you and closing you in, isolating you at times? I know I sure have. And so our idea is to come together to share that. Now last year we had to shift to an online format, and that worked as well as we could make it work. But we're excited to be back in person, and I shared with several of you as we were gathering that today for the first time, and since I can't remember when, the university's daily report of COVID cases among students was 0. So I was really pleased to see that. And we're really delighted to be hosting the event here at Red Tea House, thanks to Mr. Wayne Leung, the owner, for opening especially. And if you didn't get the memo or get a chance to take advantage of it, you're all entitled to free coffee or tea drink from Red Tea House for attending tonight. The series goes back to 2016, 2017, so we've been doing this for a while. We do have a website on the website for the Center for Community Engagement at the U of R that catalogs our past events, and we even have recordings of some of them as well. And thanks to Ray Diaz, our student coordinator, we're recording tonight's event as well, and once we get that captioned, we'll put it up on our YouTube channel and link it to our website too. I want to acknowledge the other co-sponsors of the event. The university's Office of Residential Life and Housing Services is a proud co-sponsor of the Breaking the Bubble series, and our representative from that office, Rebecca Orton, couldn't be here tonight, but she was certainly integral to the planning for the event. I already acknowledged Ray Diaz, our student coordinator. Thank you so much, Ray. You'll hear from him later. And then certainly the Rotary Club of Rochester Southwest is well represented here tonight. I want to give a shout out to our president, Lisa Norwood, and also to Eleanor Coleman, who couldn't be here tonight, but she serves on our planning committee for the Breaking the Bubble series, and is again integral to planning the series. So our format is kind of casual and intimate and inviting, as the setting is here. We'll have a bit of more of a talk than a presentation, really, to be followed by discussion. And for any students who are here, the event has been approved to count toward the university's leadership program, the medallion program, and so please be sure to check in on the Campus Community Connection website, or I can help you with that afterwards too. So our title for the event tonight is Building Community Control, How City Roots Community Land Trust as Combating Gentrification of Community-Owned Land. And it's really a pleasure and an honor for me to introduce our conversation starter, Graham Hughes. Graham is a graduate of Hobart and Wayne Smith Colleges in Geneva, and he has also completed a master's degree in education and community development at the University of Toronto. Along the way, he served as an AmeriCorps Vista member with the Rochester Youth Year program, the fellowship program, which is one of the programs coordinated through my office, the Center for Community Engagement. And Graham served with the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative, or RMAPI, as you may have know it. And then Graham was later hired as a Community Operations Associate at RMAPI. Presently, Graham serves as Special Project Manager with City Roots Community Land Trust. And please join me in welcoming Graham Hughes to lead our conversation.
Thanks very much, Glenn. Hi, everybody. Hi, it's nice to be with you all tonight. Like Glenn said, my name is Graham. I'm the Special Projects Manager with City Roots Community Land Trust. In addition to all the things that Glenn shared about me, I've been a member of City Roots Community Land Trust since 2017. I've been a staff member with the organization since 2020, so City Roots holds a special place in my heart for a number of reasons. And I'm really excited to be here talking with you all about the work that we do and the state of housing in Rochester today. So I'm gonna try and talk for 20 minutes or less so that we can talk as a group for most of the time that I'm here. There's a few things that I wanted to talk about tonight. The first is just the state of housing and the real housing crisis that exists in our city today. the idea of a community land trust, what a community land trust is, and then a bit about City Roots as a community land trust and what we're doing here in Rochester. So if you didn't know, Rochester has a pretty serious housing crisis. The crisis didn't start yesterday or 10 years ago. It's been going on for 150 years, and it has its roots in the long history of systemic racism that exists in our community. And everything from racial covenants to redlining, to the types of mortgages people got access to, who could get access to mortgages, to zoning policy, urban renewal. More or less every major policy related to housing in the 20th century created segregation and disinvestment in communities of color and throughout our city. I would really encourage you all, if you haven't seen it already, my good friend and a member of City Roots Board of Directors, Shane Wiegand, gives an incredible presentation that really details all of the history behind this policy, and most importantly, the resistance to it that people in our city have led for generations, titled Racist Policy and Resistance in Rochester. His name is Shane Wiegand. He gives these presentations all the time. So if you haven't seen that, I highly, highly recommend it to get an in-depth view of what the history of our city is. And today, what this long history has led to is a really serious housing crisis. Is a really serious housing crisis. I'm just going to share a couple different statistics about the state of housing in Rochester today. Before the pandemic, there were 8,000 to 9,000 legal evictions every year in our city. Those are just the legal ones. There are probably hundreds, maybe thousands more illegal or informal evictions that take place when a landlord tells a tenant, if you don't leave tomorrow, I'm gonna take you to court until they leave. The vast majority of those cases had no representation in court because tenants are not guaranteed a lawyer legally. And so it's really, really bad. You know, the pandemic kind of paused evictions for a while, but there are hundreds of cases in the courts right now, all across Rochester. So the eviction crisis is still going on to this day. There's a serious lack of affordable housing for people that make less than $35,000 a year. 73% of those people face a rent burden, which means that they're paying more than 30% of their income towards the cost of rent or housing costs every year, or every month. So, you know, think about your own bills. How much of your income on a monthly basis goes towards rent? For me, it's probably about 25-30%. So I think I'm pretty close to being rent burdened. But I'm really fortunate that it's not that bad, because being rent burdened in that way means you have to give up paying for other really essential goods and services that you need to live: food, clothing, shelter, transportation. And for the vast majority of, maybe not the vast majority, but the majority of our city who live at or near the poverty line, those are real choices they have to make every day. And the fact that housing costs so much is a huge driver of that. Connected to that unaffordability of housing is the fact that, according to a 2019 housing market study, there was an additional 15,221 units of affordable rental housing needed for people that make less than $20,000 a year. That's an incredible amount of housing. That's more than 150% of what already exists for people that make that level of income. It's really staggering. And the housing that does exist in Rochester is in really, really bad shape. It's really low quality. Almost all of it was built before the 1970s. I don't remember the exact percentage, but a huge amount of it was built before the 1940s, and most of it in previously redlined neighborhoods has never been properly maintained. So it's in really, really bad shape. And 50% of all of the rental housing in our city is owned by what that same housing market study called either marginal amateur landlords or slumlords. It means 50% of all the rental housing in our city is owned by people who are either out there explicitly trying to exploit low-income people and communities of color, or people who are doing it unintentionally. It's half of all the rental housing in our city. And yet at the very same time, the Rochester housing market is very, very competitive. The average sale price of a home in 2021 was $142,000, and was $142,000, which is a 12% increase since the previous year. And this has been going on. It's only gotten worse in the last couple of years with the pandemic, but that's not new. The average sale price per square foot in Rochester is up $100, which is 16.3% since last year. So we have a city where the vast majority of housing is in really bad shape. It's still really expensive. People can't afford it. And where there is good quality housing, especially homes that people can buy, it's going crazy. The prices are going up like crazy. So I talked about the historical legacy that kind of created or set the foundation for a lot of the dynamics that we see today. But there's, in my mind, in my analysis, there's a real reason why this stuff is continuing and why nothing is being done about it on a large scale. And that's because the real estate industry and the banking industry, or the people that profit from all of this, are doing really, really well. Globally, real estate is worth $217 trillion. That makes up 60% of all the assets in the world, and 75% of all that wealth is in housing. Now, a lot of this is concentrated in the big, huge centers of industry and real estate, like New York City. But the same dynamics are at play in Rochester. The real estate industry is incredibly powerful here. In fact, and they make that power and wealth known through, one way through is through campaign donations. So, for example, in 2017, Mayor Lovely Warren's re-election campaign received roughly $280,000 from the real estate industry. Now, they don't just give that money out to get their friend elected. They give it out because they want policies passed that support their interests. That's how lobbying and campaigns work in the United States. In fact, 20 of the 28 top donors to her campaign were from the real estate industry. And this is, I point Lovely Warren's campaign out because there's a lot of research that's been done into this. I didn't have to go and dig through all the campaign records myself. But if I did, I'm willing to bet that she's not the exception to the rule. She's just an example of the dynamics at play in Rochester. And even more fundamentally, city school districts and school districts in general receive a lot of funding through property taxes, but so do municipal governments. In fact, the city of Rochester receives about 1/4 of its entire revenue every year in property taxes, which to me says that city departments and administrations have a real incentive to get as much value out of the land and housing in their city as possible, because the more value that they can get, the higher they can assess the property taxes, the more money they can get in revenue every year. So we really have a city government and a real estate industry that are codependent on one another, pushing a lot of this forward. And I think it's easiest to talk about it at the local level, because there is that clear connection between real estate and city governments, but this is the case at all levels of government, which is what makes this problem so hard to deal with. So what can we do about it? I put out a lot of facts that probably seem a little depressing. They're a little depressing to me if I think about them for too long. But one of the main things that we can do, that I believe we can do, that City Roots is trying to do, is take ownership of the land and the resources on it. That's our whole mission, is taking land and resources out of the private speculative market and putting them under community control so that they can be permanently affordable and democratically controlled by members of the community forever. That's what a community land trust is, more or less. It's a democratic, community-based organization that acquires and stewards land and housing for a community of people and with a community of people in order to ensure that the land and housing and whatever other resources are on that land remain permanently affordable and controlled by the community. We have a a really unique approach to doing community democracy. We have something called a tripartite board structure, which dedicates 1/3 of the 12 board seats to community members, another third to people that live on CLT land, and a final third to public interest representatives who have some kind of technical expertise. And in City Roots, all three of these different sections of the board are directly elected by our community. So every year we have an annual meeting, people come together, they see the nominations for the board of directors, and they vote directly on who should govern this land. We also have a really unique tool called, I guess it's called a ground lease. Well, let me back up. When a community land trust acquires a piece of property, typically there's one deed to that piece of property, one deed to the land itself, underneath the building, or the improvement, and the improvement itself. That's all wrapped up in one legal entity. When a land trust acquires that property, we separate those two things so that there's one legal deed to the land and one legal deed to the improvement or the property, or the structure, I'm sorry. Whatever happens on top of the land happens, but the land trust always maintains ownership of the land itself. And that lets us put special rules and requirements on the buildings or the structures on top of our land, the biggest one being about permanent affordability. So we have like a little math formula that says this is, how much home, for example, on land trust land can be sold for, or how much a rental unit on land trust land can be rented for. We have the legal ability to enforce these things, which is what allows us to create long-term permanent affordability, because again, we always maintain ownership of the land. That's the basic idea of a community land trust. It's community control of land and permanent affordability, so that the resources in the community are democratically controlled and available for everybody. The idea for the community land trust is, the idea that people should collectively own the land is something that has existed for a long, long time, probably as long as humans have been around on the earth. But the specific formation of the community land trust was started in the late 1960s by a group of civil rights leaders from Georgia who traveled abroad to Israel to learn about their cooperative farming system and came back and adopted it in their own community as a way to fight for freedom and self-determination for Black people in the South during the civil rights movement. The first ever community land trust was called New Communities, Inc. It still exists in a different form today. New Communities actually owns a former plantation which they use as an educational center for community land trust work down in, I think it's just outside of Alabama, Georgia. And after New Communities started in the late 60s and 70s, the idea of the land trust slowly started to spread. It was adopted to urban communities like Boston and New York City, and within a few decades, really beginning in the early 2000s, the CLT movement exploded. Today there's almost 300 community land trusts across the United States. There's several dozen in Canada, I think at least 150 in the United Kingdom, many more across Europe and Central and South America. The idea that democratically governed, community-owned land is a solution to the problems that so many communities faced, based in the housing crisis that all those other communities are facing, just like Rochester. It's really taken off, and it's really powerful. And so that's the basic idea behind the community land trust. We at City Roots have been putting this into practice since 2016. The people that founded City Roots Community Land Trust did so out of a grassroots organizing movement called Take Back the Land, which arose out of the foreclosure crisis of the early 2010s specifically to fight to keep one of our current board members, our current vice president of the board, Liz McGriff, in her home. A bank had taken over control of Liz's home. They raised her mortgage rates really significantly in the aftermath of the financial crisis. They were trying to evict her, and for several years, people in our community fought back. They held eviction blockades and marches down the street and did all these incredible things to keep Liz in her home. And after several years, they formed the organization, the nonprofit that is now City Roots Community Land Trust, and Liz's home became the first home in our community land trust back in 2016. And since then, we've really grown. You know, we were founded, what was that, 6 years ago? Yeah, time flies. We were founded 6 years ago now, as a completely volunteer-run grassroots community organization, and today we have 5.5 full-time staff, a yearly operating budget of about $300,000, a development budget of roughly $700,000 to $800,000. I hope I'm right. I know my director Joe is somewhere over on the east side telling me, those are the wrong numbers. But we have all these resources, and we have 19 properties that include 7 single-family homes, 4 of which are currently owner-occupied or about to be owner-occupied. We have 25 permanently affordable rental units, 4 community gardens, 3 commercial spaces, and 1 permanent tent encampment for our unhoused neighbors called Peace Village. So we've really come a really long way. We have an incredibly dedicated board of directors and a wonderful, beautiful membership of community members that make our, the democracy part of the community land trust go. And we're really, really proud of the work that we've done. I think one of the best examples of a recent project that we worked on was last spring when, in partnership with a group called the Citywide Tenant Union of Rochester, we were able to acquire 8 new properties that in total had more than 300 code violations across all of that. That more than doubled our portfolio of property and brought about 75 new residents into the community land trust. We've made a lot of progress curing those code violations. I think more than half of them have been cured at this point. But the total cost of that project to fix up and renovate all of these 8 buildings to the standard that they need to be renovated to is about $1.7 million. Just to give you an idea of the kind of investment that is needed in the housing in our city because of that long history of neglect. Another really cool project that I'm personally very passionate about is a coalition that we've built over in the Beechwood and Marketview Heights neighborhood to try and transform a 14-acre plot of land called Goodman Plaza. That was at one point a municipally run waste dump. Our goal is to get that transformed according to some community vision. But I think we've knocked on more than 500 doors over in the neighborhood thus far, bringing people into that coalition work. So to me, that's another big part of what the democracy side of City Roots looks like. So yeah, we've only been around for 6 years, but we've come a really, really long way. I'm personally very proud and very grateful for all the wonderful people that are a part of City Roots, like Dorian back there, who's been with the organization as a board member for 4 years, 5 years? Several years. Dorian's been with us for a number of years. He's the reason that we've started to come to work on the west side of the Plex neighborhood, just up the street. Without people like Dorian and the dozens of other community members that have come together to build this organization from the ground up and fight for community control and permanent affordability, we wouldn't be doing this in Rochester. So if you live in the city of Rochester, you're eligible to become a member of the Community Land Trust. The only requirements for membership that we have are paying annual dues of $25, attending a meeting, or 4 meetings over the course of the calendar year, and volunteering with us in some capacity. If you meet 2 of those 3 things, and live in the city of Rochester, and if you meet those things, you can vote for our board of directors. I think, our next annual meeting is at the end of March. So if you do those things in the next month, you can come vote for our board and join us in fighting for community control and democratically governed land. Yeah, I think that's all I'd like to say for now. So thank you all very much.
If you own the land, there are 2 separate deeds, I understood this. So who's responsible for snow removal, for all that stuff? What part of the deed takes care of that?
Can you repeat the question?
So the question was about if there's 2 separate deeds for the property, who takes care of things like snow removal and like maintenance on the property. It depends on the specific kind of ground lease that we work out, the specific agreement between us and whoever owns the property or the structure. In some of our buildings, we own both the land and the property or the housing. And so we're responsible for doing all of that, just like any property owner would be. But in the case where we own the land and a family is the owner occupant of the house, they're responsible for things like snow removal. And part of the deal of joining the community land trust, in addition to getting a really, really good deal on the home, is that we're able to connect people with services like snow removal. We have contractors that we work with if they need something fixed up in their home. We can actually step in and make mortgage payments on behalf of people who own homes on land trust land. So there's a lot of ways that we support homeowners, but in the end, they are responsible for snow removal.
Is the taxes separated?
Yeah, but for the recording. Okay.
I can repeat.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Are the taxes separated, or do land trust pay the taxes, since the land trust owns the land?
So we pay the taxes. Sorry, the question was, are the taxes separate as well if the land trust owns the land and the homeowner owns the home? Yeah, the land trust will pay taxes on the land that we own, and the homeowner would pay taxes on the home that they own.
What happens when the homeowner dies?
That's a very good question. Thankfully, we have not had a homeowner pass away yet, but the home would go through the same process that a new home in the community land trust would go through. I think we haven't written a policy yet to say that the homeowner gets to decide who gets the home after they pass away. But
So the homeowner goes to the bank and gets a mortgage, but you can't get a mortgage on land. So am I right about that?
Go ahead. You're
No,
right.
I'm asking you. So you buy the land, you buy the whole property as it exists, right? Let's say the structure comes down, or gets renovated. I mean, the homeowner goes to the bank, gets a mortgage, but you don't have a mortgage.
for the land,
Yeah.
no, typically we buy the land outright. Yeah.
And how do banks do this?
There's a couple banks that have special mortgage products for community land trusts
Yeah.
homes. I think the one nationally is Fannie Mae, has a special CLT home mortgage. But locally, we work with Genesee Federal Co-op Credit Union, who,
Oh, okay.
yeah, they work with all of our homeowners, right in Rochester.
Gregory Street, that way.
Yep,
That's
absolutely.
okay, great.
Yeah, there's a lot of wonderful things.
So
with
they're the
it.
most friendly.
Yeah, and they're I think her title is CEO, Melissa Marquez.
Yes.
She's the president of our board, so we,
Oh, shit.
yes, yeah, she's a longtime land trust
That's really
supporter.
cool, okay.
So, yeah, we work very closely with them.
And the slumlords, I'm assuming are all absentee slumlords, is that correct? All living in the suburbs? None of them live in Rochester?
I don't know. I don't know.
Oh, like that far away?
Yeah,
Whoa, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any statistics off the top of my head on that, but what I do know is that it's very common, at least especially in the last couple of years, for investors from out of town, out of state, out of the country even,
Wow.
to buy investment properties in Rochester.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
I just, an article in the paper yesterday, they talked about an Israeli gentleman in Jersey who owns property on Leonard Street, which is just down the street. So if I get ready to sell my home, and I want to, how do I guarantee that I can sell it to you guys?
You know, we're still trying to answer that question ourselves because you're not the first person that said that. Yeah, I guess what I would say is if you decide that you are gonna sell your home, just let us know, and we'll do our best to come up with the money to buy it. Yeah. The other thing that some other community land trusts around the country do is they have figured out how to work with elders in the community who, you know, when their time comes, donate the home to the community land trust, and it becomes a land trust home through that. And what I really like about there's this one community land trust in Minnesota that every time that happens, they make a beautiful plaque, put it right on the front of the home that tells the story of the person that donated the home, and that stays with the house forever. So I would, it's, you know, we have a lot of things going on, but I would really like to develop something like that in Rochester.
What part do the zoning laws play in this housing crisis? None?
No, quite a big role actually. I mean, it's the answer is going to depend on who you ask, but in my opinion, far too much of Rochester has been zoned for only single-family homes. You know, my neighborhood that I live in, Beechwood, for example, is a huge section of the neighborhood. It's about 950 plots of land that back in the early 2000s were zoned for R1, single-family use only. And in all that time, there was one new single-family home built, but there was almost 100 destroyed. And that's because it's really hard in neighborhoods like Beechwood to really, you know, invest in building new homes like that. There's just not the demand for it. Not that people don't want single-family homes, but that people in my neighborhood don't oftentimes have the resources to buy market-rate single-family homes, especially newly built ones. What there's a huge need for, like I showed, is affordable rental housing. There's also a huge need for affordable single-family homes, but you know, zoning is kind of the rules that the market plays by, you know, and so just with those zoning laws, it causes a lot of problems. Yeah, back there.
Does the land trust have rentals?
Yes, we do. We have, I don't remember the exact number of, no, I do. Let me do the math. I think we have 25 rental units that are all permanently affordable. A lot of them are under construction right now because they were part of that big acquisition that I mentioned last spring that had 300 code violations across all of them. But yes, we do have permanently affordable rental properties.
Oh, one of the big things that people have asked me about recently is there are many people who live in the 19th ward and would love to stay here, but they're getting up in age and they do not want to continue to have a house that is 2 or 3 stories, and they also don't want to have total responsibility for all of the maintenance and that needs to be done. And so I'm throwing this out to you to say, you know, and these people would like to own, but there's no market value single story housing or handicap accessible housing in this area. And they would love to stay in this area because they've been here. And so I'm throwing that out to you and saying, hey, this is what people are telling me and that they would like to see. And I currently am the president of the 19th Ward Community Association, and I keep hearing this from lots of different people. So that should be something that affordable senior housing, or market value senior housing would be lovely to see.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And I'm a real big fan of tiny houses, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, so Reach Advocacy is working on building a tiny home village, I think near the Bull's Head brownfield site.
Yes.
I see it on the map. And we partner with them, that when that gets built, it'll be on land trust land. And the other thing is that all the homes that City Roots renovates, because that's almost exclusively what we've done to this point, is buy up old homes and put a lot of money into renovating them. All the homes that we've done that to, and will continue to do that, to renovate, are age-in-place homes. So we're just finishing a home on Katy Street right now. It's got a first floor bedroom, full bathroom, laundry, kitchen on the first floor, all handicap accessible. It's a it's a 2-story, 4-bedroom home, but the idea with the way that we design our homes is that they're built to last in terms of the quality of the home, but also in terms of who can live in the home. That's really important to us in the work that we do. Dorian.
Can you just talk about co-op ownership? You know, because I don't know if they know that, you know, that there's options.
Yeah.
On rentals, or like somebody can actually own or rental. So talk a little bit about co-op.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you for asking about that. We haven't done it yet, but something that we're working on right now with some partner organizations out of New York City, with a regional funder, is turning some of the rental buildings that we have right now into some kind of either co-op or some other type of shared equity housing model. We're not exactly sure what that will look like yet, but the idea is that you know, just like you buy a home, a single family home that's you pay a mortgage on it, you would buy a share of this co-op. You would pay a monthly fee equivalent to a mortgage into this cooperatively owned housing, and you would build equity and wealth. You would own your apartment in the same way that you would own your home. So, like I said, we're not there yet. We're still kind of figuring out what that will look like, especially legally and financially in the long term. But that's something that we're actively pursuing in Rochester.
This isn't anything really to do with what you're talking about, but I wanted to say that my great-grandparents used to own this building here many years ago, of course, because I'm pretty old too. And it was the Burton Grocery Store, URNE, and they lived at 111 Brooks Avenue. And I have pictures of my grandmother and grandfather, great-grandparents, in a horse and buggy delivering groceries. So I'm kind of really from this area, and I do Meals on Wheels. So, and just today I was with someone who was driving for me. I can drive, but whatever, long story. My person is in Utah skiing right now, but anyway, and he's from Pittsburgh, and he never has been in the city before. And people don't come into the city from that area because they're afraid. And he was just appalled, not about the housing, because we were on Orange and Grape and all that, just how horrendous it is for people. And as you know, the renters are afraid to say anything to their landlords because they're afraid they're going to get evicted. And these people live in horrible, it doesn't just happen here in the city, but I mean, it's just disgusting how these landlords get away with it. And I wish there was something else that we could do to the landlords, because they'll do a little fixing here and there, a little fixing here and there, and the people live in squalor, and it's just horrendous, you know. That's my little story for the day.
It's really horrible. I've seen so many examples of that working for the land trust. I mean, the biggest thing that many individual people can do, and I think to kind of immediately try and do something about that, is just call code enforcement. Code enforcement in the city is horribly understaffed and under-resourced, but you know, it is their responsibility to do that. But the other thing that I think every tenant in Rochester needs to do is organize a tenant association in their building. That can be, you know, alone, a person or a tenant is relatively powerless compared to a landlord. But together, with the collective power of all the people that rent, matches or beats the power of the landlord. Because ultimately their ability to continue owning a building in such terrible quality depends on tenants paying rent. And if all the tenants came together and said, hey, we're not going to pay you rent anymore until you fix these things up, the landlord's kind of stuck.
Well, I know we have really good landlords, you know, some of them also, and so it just, I mean, I know people, landlords who have actually sold most of their buildings or houses recently because of what's been going on out there. And they were good landlords, you know, they would sometimes help out their tenants and like that with payments and things like that, so I don't want to say that all the landlords are scummy, but there's a lot of good ones too, but it's just too bad, like you say, that the kids can't get anything done, you know, these landlords that just wreak havoc on everybody. Anyway,
Yeah,
it makes me mad.
me too.
Graham, as I acknowledged at the beginning of the presentation, the series is co-sponsored by the University's Office of Residential Life and Housing Services. And I know a lot of the folks in the Southwest neighborhoods here are aware of the pressure, the market pressure that the university is exerting on the prices of housing, particularly in these neighborhoods and streets adjacent to the university. Since 2005, the university has been increasing the size of the student body, and so there's more students to be housed, more student housing has been built, but we also have more students, like, correct me if I'm wrong, Ray, living off campus. And so it's sort of driving those market forces. So my question to you is City Root Community Land Trust sort of addressing that dynamic directly, and or are you familiar with examples from other cities where the community land trusts have sort of tried to counteract that kind of market pressures driven by university?
So in Rochester with City Roots, most of our work is in Beechwood, Markview Heights, and the Plex neighborhood. So I guess the work that we've done in Plex addresses this a little bit, but it's pretty small in scale to this point. The best example that I could think of a community land trust fighting the gentrification pressures from the university is actually in Buffalo, where the Fruit Belt Community Land Trusts sprung up in around the same time that City Roots did, in the Fruit Belt neighborhood, which is directly adjacent to the one of the big medical complexes in Buffalo. And they came about because the University of Buffalo had proposed to basically take over their neighborhood and turn it into housing for people that either worked at the medical center or were students at the medical center. And they stopped those plans dead in their tracks. Community organizing to fight, to win, community control the neighborhood, to build the Fruit Belt Community Land Trust, stopped that from happening and saved the Fruit Belt neighborhood. And the first executive director of the Fruit Belt Community Land Trust actually just ran for the mayor of Buffalo. It's India Waldron. She was an executive director of a community land trust out there, the Fruit Belt Community Land Trust. So yeah, it's very possible. Even just doing the organizing work to make it difficult for universities and developers to gentrify, it can be very impactful. But if there are groups in the 19th Ward, for example, that are interested in doing this, I would say please reach out to City Roots. To me personally, I'd love to have a conversation with you about that, and maybe connect you to the folks in Buffalo who've done that kind of organizing work. But the other thing that I would say to that is, like, the university has a responsibility to one, not do that, but also to invest in these communities. I don't know if I'm exactly right on this, but as a 501c3, C4 organization, the University of Rochester probably doesn't pay property taxes. I don't, Glenn's nodding his head, so I'm assuming I'm right that they don't pay property taxes. That's an incredible amount of land to not pay property taxes on. So, and the university is not resource poor. They have a lot of money. So if the university is going to continue building this type of student housing, or even just increasing its student population such that students need to move off campus, the least they could do is invest in things like a community land trust in the neighborhoods that they're expanding into, so that there is enough housing that's good quality for the people that come from those neighborhoods.
We're too busy building urgent cares all over every corner. Rochester General Store on there, where you look, you know, they're just, and they're huge, and they're beautiful, and, I mean, how come we have a hospital? I mean, I know the COVID's kind of screwed everything up, but, I mean, I used to work over, so, yeah.
I
You know,
mean,
they want money, they wanna make money, and that's the way they can do it, but they're not really helping their neighbors, really, so, or their students.
So I just have an interesting thing to share. I live in Southwest. I live on Linden Street, between, Meigs and Goodman. Okay, so it's not the most architecturally significant part of Linden Street, but it's not the least either. And so on my block, about maybe 5 years ago, the nicest house on the block, at least in the interior, sold for about I think it was like $150,000. And it had sold 3 times since I've lived in the neighborhood. The couple that bought it, I knew as they had children, you know, nice people, but they weren't staying in the city, that's for sure. So they, there was a big hullabaloo on a Facebook group when they paid $150,000 for it, right? At, 3% or something like that. And they were putting it up for rent for like $2,600 a month, right? Pretty smart move on their part, right? They didn't want to sell the house, they wanted to rent it for $2,600 a month. Their mortgage payment was probably $900. People were pretty upset about that, you know, and voiced it. However, the fact is that they recently moved in. I believe they have successfully rented it for $2,600 a month. So, I don't know, you know, I find it fascinating, you know. People are willing to pay that. And, you know, it's hard as a homeowner, you know, when I think about my house and I think about, you know, maybe, because I have a partner who does not want to live in the city at all. I want to retain my presence there, but, you know, I don't, my house is not, remodeled to the way that it's at its highest, you know, selling value. So I rent it to students, you know, for $600 a month for 4 students. I mean, same thing. That's what I'm thinking. Although it's not in sync with, you know, with what your mission is, but that's what you're facing.
yeah, no, I mean, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with people like yourselves renting a unit or a home. Like, you live in the neighborhood, you live around here, that's not the problem. The problem are these really big time, it's the big time landlords and in-max buying up all these properties and exploiting the people that live there pretty significantly. It's also that, you know, I didn't get into this in the remarks that I shared, but all of this housing that is being bought up by these landlords, you know, some of them are buying them in cash, a lot of them are buying and constructing them using big financing packages, and there's just this big bubble of financial wealth that is built on top of all this housing, which is what drives the prices up in the first place. You know, that $217 trillion that's based in real estate, a lot of that is just the betting, the exchanging of, you know, all those, you know, the credit default swaps and all those crazy financial tools that they have. That's all still going on, and that's really what's driving all these problems. That's why, you know, people can get in and make so much money in real estate, and why it's so hard for good people who want to rent at affordable prices and just make ends meet doing it, can't do that. It's the big system that's the problem. It's not the decisions of individual people, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So I'd just like to read a little message that I got the other day that says, "Hello there, Karen. I'd like to speak to you about 90 Roseland Street, my house. Just wanted to know if you are planning to sell it. Please let me know either way. Dylan." Dear Dylan, I am working very hard to stop random people contacting me about the future of individual homeownership by driving housing costs up and then renting them back at exorbitant rents. It is these tactics that destroy neighborhoods. Stop.
Very good.
And Dylan sent me a little thumbs up. But we are bombarded, homeowners are bombarded every single day in my mail, in my phone, everywhere. It's insane.
It's bullying tactics.
It's absolutely not, and it is destroying our neighborhoods. I heard, and I may have misheard this, but you may know the answer to this, that 60% of the housing is rental in Rochester?
I think it's a little more than that.
Wow.
That crushes me.
Wow.
That crushes me. 60% of every place in this city that people live in is rented.
But that's residential and business combined, is that what you're saying, that
No.
it's higher?
I think the number of people that live in Rochester that are tenants or renters is actually closer to 70%. Unless Dorian, you know.
Yeah, so this is a good conversation, that's something important, I like the conversation that Graham is having with you guys. So you guys are asking some good questions, and I think it's a good conversation, but one of the goals of the land trust is really to try to get folks to ownership, right? So the whole idea between the land trust is to try to get folks to own a home at a reasonable amount of cost to purchase a home. So that is what the land trust is trying to do. If you have 3 houses so far, but I just wanted to say that because I hear you. I live in Flex, and we feel the same issues that you guys are having. So the land trust is a tool that we're trying to work on. The goal is to try to get homeownership. Right now we have some rentals in hopes to kind of convert rentals into co-ops, because that might be another option in helping neighborhoods, right? So if somebody's renting and they own that particular piece that they're renting, they're probably gonna take more, care of it, no issues, and they have equity, they can move from that into purchasing a home. So I love all the feedback here, you're doing a good job.
So now my brain is going, isn't that what our government is supposed to do for us? Like, why do we have to have a land trust to step in to protect the people that are trying to make a city and a functional city? Now, see, now you've got me going. Now I'm gonna take those little flyers and tape them to a brick and send them back to the people that send them to me.
I mean, the answer is, I talked about it a little bit, to why the government is doing all of this. It's because of the incredible power of the massive for-profit real estate and banking industries. That, for the last 40, 50, 60 years have been doing everything they can to get policies passed at every level of government to increase the value of real estate, because that's what makes the money. Did you know that since the early 1970s, maybe the mid 1970s, it's been illegal to build new public housing in America? Public housing is historically one of the most reliable, economically efficient ways to build quality rental housing. The United States has not always done it well, but across the world, this is a tool that governments use to build quality, affordable rental housing that is very cost effective too. And it's literally been illegal to do that in the United States for about 50 years.
Why?
Because it's against the interests of the real estate industry.
You know, I had an American history teacher. She was a nun, and she was very tall and very thin. And she would say, "And why did that happen?"
She's right.
Just like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Why did that happen?
the rationale that was given was that all this public housing that was built in the United States was really bad quality, and there was a lot of racism that went into this argument as well, saying that the people that lived in public housing were dangerous and bad people, more or less, because disproportionately it was communities and people of color that lived in this rental housing. So it was a lot of, racially fueled fear combined with systemic underinvestment in public housing that led to the common idea that public housing is really bad. We can't build more public housing. And that all benefited the real estate industry because it meant that all the money that was previously used to build public housing was funneled into things like the low-income housing tax credit, which is basically just a policy that gives free money to developers to kind of build affordable housing.
Sometimes it seems like we do get public housing because, the things I've heard is that, the landlord will put too many people into a home. They'll make the dining room into a bedroom, and because, they have to be told when someone's going to be inspecting, that they'll take the bed out and put the dining room table back. So, there's just so much, where do you start? Where do you start when there's so much crap going on? And you say, it's just money. Another different thing is that I had a fire 4 or 5 years ago, and all I did was I made a bathroom downstairs, there used to be a closet, and I knocked the room, I made it 3 bedrooms upstairs, and my assessment went up $30,000.
Holy crap.
$30,000 to have the same floor plan and everything. So it's coming from all different ways, the city, it's just crazy. And it's just, seems like unsurmountable, but we are getting kind of pretty good on COVID, so maybe we should start working on something else.
Yeah. I'm biased, but I think the land trust is a pretty good place to start.
Can I ask a tangential question? Infrastructure like green spaces or bike lanes or decent sidewalks, do you see them as community builders or more of gentrification? Of, once we get these nice amenities, all these people from the suburbs who might want city jobs and want to work, come back in. What's your take on that?
I think it really depends on the kind of local context within which they're built. So I think it's very, very common for city governments to make massive investments in infrastructure and green space, like the new Rock the Riverway project, as a way to incentivize more development. I took some classes in grad school that talked about that's exactly what city governments are thinking. That's why they make those kinds of investments. And that, they sometimes work, sometimes they don't. But when those types of investments are made in a neighborhood or a local context, where there's the possibility that all that investment will come, as opposed to, we invested in, new sidewalks or, some nice new parks and green space in a neighborhood where 30 to 50% of the lots in that neighborhood were price controlled because they were in the land trust, then that would lead to development without displacing people, because it would be legally impossible for the values of the land around those investments to go crazy. And furthermore, the community would have control and decision-making power over what happened with the lots around it. So yeah, I think it really does depend on the context. I want to live in a world where we can have nice things and it doesn't displace our neighbors. But that's not the way a lot of city governments act.
Yeah, we've been working for the past 10 years trying to get short distance busing to the schools in the neighborhood so that not all kids are getting bused across town, because that has really helped destroy the sense of neighborhood in our various neighborhoods. But we still face the fact that an awful lot of the students end up homeless sometime during the school year, and finding a way to house them so they can stay in the same school and that it doesn't totally destroy their ability to concentrate on their schoolwork. I don't know if there's anything that can be done in we tried to get the NSC to work with the school so that the NSC could let them know when some child was going to be homeless who goes to that school, and trying to get the kids housed, kids and parents housed in somewhere near the same school after they get evicted from here or there is something that we'd like to see happen. The idea of having tiny homes or small homes that are very affordable would certainly help in that respect, and that there'd be less chance that somebody's going to get evicted. How close are we to getting codes that allow for tiny homes?
Well, I can say the tiny home project that City Roots is involved in is still relatively early in its development. I think they're about 20% funded right now before building their tiny home. And I don't think the city of Rochester would change its zoning code, at the very least until there's kind of a proven tiny home, village concept in the city. I think there is though a debate over some zoning code right now for people to build like smaller permanent structures like on their property that's already zoned for single family homes. So that might be a way to approach it sooner, although it wouldn't be, you have a lot with like 4 or 5 tiny homes altogether. But in terms of, housing students who face homelessness, I really like the community school model, which kind of takes that, gives at least one person, but really the whole school, the responsibility of caring for students in a really holistic way. I know the city school district's trying that out in a couple of different schools right now. I really like that model. And then there's a bill in the New York State Senate right now, and the legislature called the Housing Access Voucher Program, which would massively expand vouchers for people who experience homelessness. Because we work with a number of homeless advocates, and what they have said over and over again is that there just aren't the resources there to house people anything more than like a night or two in a hotel, or get them into more permanent housing. It's really hard. The resources just aren't there.
If I may. With an eye on the clock, I'm going to step in, and I have an announcement, and I'll turn it over to Ray to close it out, and we continue the conversation with Graham as we close out our night. But Graham, you mentioned your colleague and friend Shane Wiegand as part of your remarks this evening, and I just wanted to do a little promo. Tomorrow evening, the Mellon program in the Digital Humanities at the University of Rochester will be presenting a talk by Shane Wiegand. This is online, virtual, so you can participate remotely. The title is Tracing the Lines of Segregation, Building an Anti-Racist History Curriculum for Rochester. And this is work that Shane and others have been involved with for several years now, actually. And it's really quite well developed, but it'll be showcased in this virtual presentation tomorrow evening. That's at 7 o'clock p.m. No, correct that, sorry. 5:30 to 7 o'clock tomorrow evening online. And if you want the link, or just see me afterwards and I can share that with you. But with that, I'll turn it over to Ray to close our evening.
Well, thank you, Graham, for joining us tonight. Let's give him a round of applause. As Ben mentioned earlier tonight, if you're a University of Rochester student and you want to make sure you get credit for tonight's event, make sure to check in with him. Thank you to our co-sponsors, the Office of Residential Life and Housing Services, the Center for Community Engagement, and the Rotary Club of Rochester Southwest. Thank you to the Red Tea House for opening tonight, especially for us. And also thanks to all of you for showing up tonight. We appreciate your attendance, and we hope you continue to stay engaged with everything that we're involved in. And lastly, as a quick preview to our next event, on Monday, March 21st at 7:30 p.m. right here, we'll be talking about building bridges through creative community engagement, featuring Sean Dunwoody and Suzanne Mayer of Hinge Neighbors, and they will be speaking about their collaboration around the Inner Loop North infill project in Rochester. Once again, thank you for joining us tonight, and have a good night.
It was the 21st?
So, the 21st, Sunday.